Hi, Michelle Glass here. Welcome to our last episode in our Chapter 9 lecture series. We need to spend just a little bit defining what is meant by the chromosomal theory of inheritance. Now, we have been using it and assuming it as we've talked, but here let's actually put a name on it. So basically, the chromosomal theory of inheritance just tells us that genes are located on chromosomes. Well, we already knew that, okay? So here I've given an example of a homologous pair, and we're going to be talking about fruit flies a little bit here today. And so we're talking about here body color and wing shape of those fruit flies. Now, based on the chromosomal theory of inheritance, Mendel basically helped us to describe the law of segregation, where homologous chromosomes separate so that traits are inherited separately. So we saw that with our peas when we were looking at characteristics like pea color and pea shape. We saw that they were inherited independently of each other. So being yellow didn't mean that you automatically were round or wrinkled. And we saw that Mendelian pattern with a dihybrid cross of 9:3 to 3:1. Well, that's not always what we see when we're looking at dihybrid crosses. Sometimes we see what's described as chromosomal linkage. In chromosomal linkage, you have genes that are located so closely together on a chromosome that they are usually just inherited together. So this is where you're going to see, if you have a gray body, again, we're talking about fruit flies, if you have a gray body, then you typically have long wings. If you have a white body, then you typically see that inherited with short wings. So the key thing that we see with linkage is you get a pattern where the offspring typically look like the parents. Now, if we were testing this out and we crossed an individual who is heterozygous for body color and wing shape with a homozygous recessive for both, Mendelian genetics tells us that we would expect to have equal amounts of each combination. So we would have, a fourth that are gray body with long wings, and a fourth that are gray body with short wings, and a fourth that are white body with long wings, and a fourth that are white body with short wings. In reality, when you do this cross with fruit flies, instead, you're getting most of your offspring looking like your parents. So if our parents were gray body with long wings, then we're going to get a set of our offspring that look like that. And then if we had our other parent was white body with short wings, we're going to get our other set of offspring looking in that way. So that tells us that those genes are probably closely located together on the chromosome, and so they're inherited together. You can see a few recombinations showing up in your offspring, so they're not every single one going to be gray and long or white and short. You'll get a small percentage that are gray and short and white and long. This recombination is due to crossing over, which we talked about during meiosis. Remember, it happens during prophase 1, where pieces of pieces of non-sister chromatids of a homologous pair can swatch pieces of chromosomes. So if you're not remembering that, go back real quick and take a look at the video on crossover. Scientists then can use this information to help create what are called genetic maps. And this is where you basically identify where our genes are located, meaning what chromosome are they located on and how do they lay out on that chromosome. We can then use recombination frequencies to help us make those maps. So the more recombination that occurs, the greater the distance is between those chromosomes, between those genes. Genes that are close in proximity on the chromosome are typically inherited together, so we won't very often see crossover giving us new combinations there. There's a special type of linkage, which is described as sex linkage or X linkage when we're talking about humans. In humans, remember, we have 23 total pair of chromosomes. 22 are described as autosomes, meaning they're coding for all kinds of stuff across the body, and then 1 pair of sex chromosomes. In humans, females are inheriting 2 X chromosomes and males are inheriting an X and a Y. Now, what we see is that that Y chromosome and the X chromosome are actually not homologous. That Y is significantly smaller and has different kinds of genes on it compared with the X. The Y is essentially making the offspring male. So the significance here is that males are inheriting one X chromosome, so that means they get one allele for all of the genes inherited on the X. The way we can identify sex linkage is we get a pattern where traits are inherited together along with sex. So we'll see that there's a pattern of having this trait in females and this other trait in males. We will see that the recessive traits show up more often in males because, again, they're only inheriting one allele for those X-linked traits. So whatever they inherit is what they get. If they inherit the dominant form, then they have the dominant form. If they inherit the recessive form, then they have the recessive form. They don't have an allele that gets to be masked. They get what they get. Okay. Now, just kind of as a side note, in humans, sex is determined by whether you're XX or XY chromosomes, but that's not the way throughout every part of nature. Some insects use an XO system. So if you're male, you get one X. If you're female, you get two X's. Other insects, like bees, go by chromosome number. So if you have 16 chromosomes, you're male. If you're diploid with 32 chromosomes, you're female. Birds use a ZW system. So 2 Z's are male, ZW is female. And some reptiles, it's based on the incubation temperature of the eggs. So for instance, sea turtles dig down their nest real deep, and those eggs that are coolest at the bottom are going to develop as female. And those eggs that are at the top, where it's warmer, are going to develop as male. And this is kind of a scary thing because global warming is changing the temperature on our planet. And so we might start to see populations of sea turtles that are predominantly male. And if that's the case, they're going to have a hard time reproducing and maintaining good population numbers. Okay, back to humans and X-linked traits. Remember, we're going to see that there are going to be more affected males than females. One example of an X-linked trait in humans is color vision, color blindness. Being able to see in color is dominant. Being colorblind is a recessive characteristic. So if we take a female who is got normal vision, but she's a carrier for color blindness, she's heterozygous, and we cross that with a male who sees color. So here we have two normal individuals. And go ahead and fill out your Punnett square. Notice you got to keep up with your X's and your Y's as well as your N's. You can pause it if you need to. Okay, I'm just going to do my top row. Notice that all my daughters, my XX offspring, are getting dad's normal X. And so they're all like safe from color blindness. But when we start filling in for our sons, our XY, mom was a carrier for the recessive trait, so 50% probability that her sons will be colorblind. Colorblindness, not that huge of a deal. You know, we can totally live with that. It's not going to affect your ability, you know, in modern times to survive and reproduce and pass that trait on. But we can see that there are other X-linked traits that can seriously have an impact on human survival. Before we do that, let's take a little bit of time to talk about that Y chromosome. So dads pass on their Y chromosome to their sons. And so you can basically trace Y chromosomes and look at ancestry. And this has been done. This is kind of interesting. So our textbook talks about looking at the Y chromosome in males in Asia. About 8% have a pretty nearly genetically similar Y chromosome. And then when they trace that back, they think perhaps that came from a common ancestor, maybe Genghis Khan. And the same can be done for Irish males. 10% of Irish males have been traced using their Y chromosome to be descendants of 9 hostages. So there are several examples given in the textbook. And in most of these cases, these fathers are conquerors. So, you know, in this case, I'm just going to say it, basically rapists, spreading their seed, and we can see that traced out in these Y chromosomes, that's kind of interesting. Okay. So we can use pedigree charts to help us identify patterns of genetic inheritance. We're going to do this for the Russian royal family, and we're going to be tracing out a trait called hemophilia. And hemophilia is a blood clotting disorder. So you're not able to produce blood clots. And so this is a really serious disease that can, especially historically, lead to early death. Now, of course, we have better treatments for people living with hemophilia. In this pedigree chart, we're going to use circles for females and squares for males. Notice that females can be either homozygous dominant, so that's normal. They can be heterozygous or carriers, so half and half, or they can be affected, that's a homozygous recessive. And then for males, they have just one choice because they're XY. They can either be X normal Y or X recessive hemophilia Y. And so they're either shaded in or not shaded in. So let's look at it first, breeding pairs. So here we have a carrier female crossed with a normal male. And then we see they're producing a carrier daughter who is going to cross with, a man from another family. And they also produce a carrier female. So now we're in the F2 generation, and we see in the F3 generation that we get an affected son, so a hemophiliac son showing up here. Notice that all of the females are carriers. None of them are affected by hemophilia here, but we do see the pattern where the males are affected. Now keep in mind, if you have blood clotting disorder, you're not going to, especially historically, be able to survive to reproductive age. So if you are a female with this, you're probably not able to do reproduction. And definitely that whole labor and delivery process, you wouldn't be able to blood clot after that. So that would kill you. You would bleed out. If you're a man with hemophilia, you know it. So you're not able to pass on a characteristic that you don't already have. So that is the signature of your X-linked traits. And that is it for Chapter 9.